Okay, question 2. This is a second population question, although on the real exam you'll only have one. The question says, figure 1 shows migration to and from Australia. We've got an immigration line at the top and an emigration line at the bottom. Immigration, remember, means into a country. Emigration is exiting a country or leaving. We've got a time scale from 1996 to 2005. Study figure 1. Outline 2 differences between migration to and from Australia. So all it's asking you to do is contrast these 2 lines. So first of all, the first difference is immigration is consistently higher than emigration. So immigration consistently higher than emigration throughout the 1996 to 2005 time period. You may well be able to see that the lines are correlated. Where we've got a peak here, you can see that they generally follow each other. You could put about correlation, but that would be looking at similarities. So in terms of differences, what we're seeing is the trend at the end here. We're seeing immigration rise from 2002 to 2005, whereas emigration is staying fairly static. So what we need to do is we need to contrast these 2 lines showing differences between immigration and emigration. If you do that, you get 2 marks, okay? Remember, decoding the exam question to show you where the marks are. Okay, next question. For a named developing country, again, let's get these keywords underlined. So it has to be a developing country, so an LEDC or NIC, industrialising country. Explain its population structure. You may use a diagram to help. When it says you may, I would strongly advise you to use a diagram. And the diagrams you're always using whenever we talk about population structure are population pyramids. So with our population pyramids, remember, we always split them in half. We can have males on one side, females on the other, and we need to decide the country we're going to use. Now, for this case study, I'll use India, because actually we will use China, because China is similar to India in lots of ways. China, you can talk a little bit more about its population structure because of the impact of the one-child policy. So what we might do with China is we might start with the birth rate. We'll do it actually as lines, so we'll do it as cohorts like this. And I'm just going to bring that birth rate in a bit as the impact of the one-child policy comes on, something like that. And then we'll start to show it moving this. Now, I'm going to try and draw the females coming in a bit. I'm going to try and draw the males a little bit further out as a result of boy-child preference and the fact that more males survive through to adulthood, which I haven't drawn that very accurately, actually. I'll put a new line down the middle there. There we go. Okay, so I'm then going to put what it is. I'm going to put China in there. And what I've got to do is I've got to explain how these features represent the country structure. So I'm going to start with the population. I might put on the side. We've got 1.3 billion people in China. And I'm going to talk about how a policy has been introduced to reduce fertility rate. And I'm going to talk about birth rates being static, is relatively static as a result of the one-child policy of 1CP. Okay, we'll talk about as the country has developed further, we're seeing greater survival rates. So rather than it being a pyramid which has steep, curved in sides like that, showing a high death rate, what we've got is that death rate dropping off, and you can see more people surviving into old age. In fact, now China's got more of a problem with an ageing population rather than anything else. So there we're pushing into we're pushing the younger people up into old age. We might like to show a smaller amount of women or females as a result of boy preference, and we know that there's actually 60 million less women in China than men as a result of the one-child policy. That's a huge demographic gender imbalance. So what you're doing is you've drawn your diagram, and then you're maybe annotating it around the outside, and then you're explaining, okay, the different features of the China population structure. You should all be able to do that, no problem. Okay, last one. Explain why it's difficult to predict future population trends. This is a tricky question. Lots of you talked about disasters and that it's very hard to know what might happen in the future. You talked about things like food shortages. You talked about perhaps Ebola and epidemics and outbreaks of disease. Whilst that's all true, what you really need to be doing is focusing on fertility rates and how that is going to change the natural increase or decrease in the future. If we see global fertility rates dropping, we might bring global population down to a sustainable level. if we see global fertility rates at 2 or 2.5, something like that. However, currently, because fertility rates are so high, we're seeing that future prediction going right up towards 10 billion. So you might talk about one-off events, and you might talk about Malthus's natural and human checks, but probably more likely you should be talking about fertility rates, you should be talking about birth rates, death rates, and why these are so hard to predict into the future. The main factors which will affect fertility rates are things like education, things like social care, health care, trying to improve childhood survival rates so that we see that global fertility rate dropping. Okay, so we're looking for keywords in there: fertility rates, birth rates, death rates, an uncertain future. And if you want to then bring in disasters, famines, plague events, those kind of things, Malthus's checks, you can do. 6 marks available. That's where you really want to go to town on your terminology.